Are you squatting high? Here's how we can fix that. If you're having trouble reaching depth consistently, especially with heavier weights, heeled shoes might be a solution worth exploring for you. Here are 3 reasons why heeled shoes work for powerlifting. Okay, I want to start off by saying that the default for most people should be flats. If you have absolutely no trouble reaching depth from your warm-up sets all the way up through your heaviest loads, you probably don't need to worry about heeled shoes. I'm also a realist, and I work with a lot of students who don't have a ton of cash on hand, and heeled shoes can tend to be very expensive. And with this video, I want to help you find out if it's worth your time before you make that investment. I also have another video on this channel about pelvic and spinal position in the squat, which you should probably check out first if you're having trouble reaching depth. But if your mechanics are good and you still can't get below parallel, it might be time to look at your footwear. So what exactly do heels do for you, and why might it be worth it? In effect, heels make depth easier to hit for most people in most situations. I'm gonna go over 3 ways how they work and try to make it as simple as I can. Number 1, they act at the ankle. This is probably the most obvious one that we're all already familiar with. If you have really tight calves or ankles, heels can be your best friend in creating the requisite forward knee travel that's needed to reach powerlifting legal depth. It's not that they improve your ankle mobility. That's an important distinction to make. They create less need for it. The squat requires a certain degree of ankle dorsiflexion for most people. By starting you off in a relatively more plantar flexed position, heeled shoes can make it so that the knee can travel further with less relative dorsiflexion taking place. Think of a giant steering wheel on a ship. If the task was to get as many revolutions to the right as possible, you would be better suited for that task if the wheel was already turned to the left than if it hadn't been touched yet. The second reason heels work is that they act on the pelvis. This one is a little less obvious, but also important. Without going too far down the PRI or the limb arc model rabbit hole, suffice it to say that by creating a change at the level of the ankle, or what some people might call moving to a different phase of gait, you can enact changes upstream at the level of the pelvis as well. In my last video about squat depth, I mentioned how difficult or sometimes impossible it is to squat below parallel with a pelvis that is anteriorly tilted and a lumbar spine that is biased towards extension. By elevating your heels in the squat, you naturally bias yourself towards a more neutral or even posteriorly tilted pelvic position, which means that a lot less movement and changes have to take place in order to reach depth. This change in pelvic position also frees up the ability to create more rotation through the femur, which is an integral part of squatting. Check out my last video on knee cave and femoral internal rotation for more on that topic. And finally, the third way that heels help you reach depth is that they help you manage your center of mass. This is possibly the simplest and most meaningful thing that heels do for you. Most people struggle to hit depth because they are falling forward while they squat, meaning that the barbell ends up in front of their midfoot at the bottom position of the squat, and they are heavily biased towards the forefoot. This can not only limit your depth, but also your top end strength. Standing on a downhill, like you are when you're in a heeled shoe, automatically biases you to get your weight backwards. Think about it. It has to, otherwise you would be falling forward. This can help tremendously with staying balanced in the squat. This is the exact same reason why goblet squats and front squats are oftentimes prettier for most people right out of the gate, because in those exercises, the weight is loaded anteriorly, and because it's out in front of you, it forces you to keep your weight back. You can think of this as essentially the same mechanism that's at play when some coaches will put a band around your knees in order to fix knee cave. Whether or not that's a good idea is a separate topic, but what that's doing is reinforcing that kind of negative stress and bringing more awareness of it to the lifter, which automatically cues them to fight against it harder. So all this to say, heels really can be a big difference maker for people who struggle to hit depth or manage their balance during squatting. Am I saying you need to go out and buy a pair of Romaleos right now? Maybe, but let's try this simple test first. If your gym has a pair of heel wedges just laying around, do a couple of sets of squats with those. Even 5 or 10 pound plates will do in a pinch. No, it's not perfect, and it's not as good as actually wearing weightlifting shoes, but it may be enough to notice a distinct difference right away in your ability to comfortably and easily reach depth, which should at least give you a clue as to whether or not it's worth making the investment and buying some heeled shoes. Well, I hope this was helpful. Leave any questions for me in the comments and be sure to subscribe for more content like this. See you guys in the next video.